The board meeting will now come to order at 5 o'clock p.m. Good evening and thank you for attending the Albuquerque Civilian Police Oversight Advisory Board meeting today on February 24th, 2026. Ms. Barilla, can I get a member roll call?
Xander Bolianitz.
Present.
Eduardo Budinaro.
Present.
Aaron Calderon.
Present.
Rowan Weimark.
Present.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You have a quorum.
Thank you, Ms. Barilla. The next order of business is the Pledge of Allegiance. All rise. I
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you.
The next order of business is the approval of the agenda. Do any board members have any proposed changes to the agenda as it is currently written? All right. Then I make a motion that the agenda be approved as written. Can I get a second?
I second.
Thank you, Member Budinaro. Ms. Barilla, can I get a roll call vote, please?
Chair Bolianitz.
Approved.
Member Budinaro.
Approved.
Vice Chair Calderon.
Approved.
Member Weimark.
Approved.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. That motion passed unanimously.
Thank you, Ms. Barilla. The next order of business is generic public comments. I do believe there are no written public comments at this time.
That is correct, Mr. Chairman.
Did anyone sign up for overall public comments?
Not for general public comment.
All right, then let's move on. The next order of business is the discussion of possible actions. The use of force policy suite review. These will be the SOPs 2-52 through 2-57. We will be kind of going in order. So the first SOP up will be 2-52. With that, let's open up the floor for public comments for specifically around SOP 2-52. And we're only going to try to have the public comments specifically for that particular policy at this time. I do believe we do have one individual who wants to speak first, and that for 2-52, and that would be Phil Jamison, I believe.
That is correct.
So Mr. Jamison, if you want to come up and just do a quick introduction, and I believe you'll have 3 minutes for the public comment.
Thank you, sir. Dave?
Okay, I'm Phil Jamison. I'm the chair of the Valley Community Policing Council. In looking at 252, focused in on core principles where it states the department holds department personnel to a higher standard than articulated in Graham v. Connor, and then the rest of that goes on to basically reiterate Graham v. Connor. So in looking at that, my question was, what actually is the higher standard and what would be a reasonable higher standard to hold a department to? I won't go into the reasons why I think we should have a higher standard. Basically, I think, like any agency, things have to move forward from time to time. And this would be a good time to do it after the CASA. The Graham v. Connor standard is objectively reasonable action, and words like minimum necessary and totality of the circumstances are really not higher standards. They're just ways to explain what is objectively reasonable. Graham v. Connor is perfectly reasonable as a standard in the instant when officers are at risk. So for instance, somebody pulls a gun, the officers are at risk or the public's at risk, you have to do what's objectively reasonable to stop the risk. But it doesn't really go into their total action. And one of the things that bothers me about this standard is that it really puts the onus on the perpetrator or subject to decide what's the risk. And the officers just react and they respond. And I think my thinking was that We need to give the officers some agency. And they need to have some responsibility in how this all goes. Recently, we talked about this use of force with Commander Norris at APD. And one of the things he pointed out was that in its entirety, 252 and the rest of the use of force standards talk a lot about de-escalation. And yet, using de-escalation is not really a core principle. And if you look at 252.5, it really, in large part, reiterates the language of de-escalation. He noted that officers often don't use de-escalatory action or plan de-escalation, but rather use commands. I don't believe commands are necessarily escalatory or de-escalatory, but they do signify a level of disrespect. And in that, they promote violence. The department's own data has shown that when you ask people why they have committed violence, the most common answer is because I was disrespected. I also think showing respect is just a good model for community policing. The rest of it is written down in what I've shared with you.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Jameson. I appreciate the feedback and the input that you guys spent on this, and we've all had a chance to review this, and I even have the printouts myself, and I think you actually do bring up a good point to define the higher standard, and also how it goes back to, I believe it is the SOP 1-1 is just the overall standards, right, where they have to treat everyone with respect at all times, and so there is, to me, that marriage of define what the higher standard is and then live up to it, right? Because I'm in total agreement, so I appreciate your feedback and the time you guys spend working on the notes and the comments.
Okay.
So with that, board members, do you have any questions for Mr. Jameson at this time?
No?
Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you.
Next up, I want to kick this over to the CPOA because I believe Gabe Reamer is here and has done a lot of preliminary work on some of these policies. So before the board goes, I want to make sure we hear from Mr. Reamer for specifically around 2-52.
Sure. I will say it is 252. I mean, we could focus on that policy. It is, when it comes to this policy suite, 252 and 253 do so much work. For the rest of the policies, it's kind of hard to talk about the other ones without referring back to those, but I'm happy to expand on anything. One question I want to ask when it comes to that suggestion by the CPC chair, is that something we want to consider to move forward as a recommendation, or we could talk about it after I give, or I speak on other things, but really I'm at your guys' mercy this evening. I'm happy to provide a general overview of the policies and the big substantial changes that I see within policy, and also cover some of the recommendations we've already made. But really, it's up whatever you guys would like, however you'd like to approach it.
Wonderful, thank you, Mr. Reamer. Executive Director McDermott, is there anything that you would like to add before we kind of go down the rabbit hole of 2-52?
Well, again, Chair, the various changes do influence different policies. So if you want to break it up per policy, Mr. Reamer can go through the changes that he's observed, that has been shared with the board, and then the recommendations that have already been accepted in just a high-level overview. And then this recommendation that the chair of the Valley CPC has made is focused on 252. So he's already done the work for the board in terms of where to insert it. So at the end of Mr. Reamer's overview, and of course if you want to ask the APD side of things too, then you make your final decision whether after each SOP or whether all the way at the end for the suite. It might be easier to do per policy. So yeah, I just leave it to Mr. Reamer to kind of give you the overview if you want. Perfect.
And then Commander Norris or any of the APD officer or APD individuals that are here, is there anything that you guys would like to add to this before we get started specifically?
The only thing I'd like to add with regard to maybe an addition to the core principles for use of force for respect. I just want to draw everybody's attention to basically what the mission statement of our police department is, and that's to treat everybody with pride, respect, integrity, and fairness. So that is an overarching core principle of every policy that we follow. You also referred back to 1-1. And that is a policy in some of our investigations, if they warrant them, where we do open up misconduct investigations where we think that this person's handling of a situation, the way he spoke to somebody, the way that he treated somebody, warranted a misconduct investigation. So I think that we have that word respect, that not only is it in our core principles of our entire department and our entire policy suite, but it's also something that we have carved out in our conduct policy, to where we have issued more IARs than I would like to count with regard to addressing that particular thing. And as far as speaking to our policy or our officers being held higher to a higher standard than Graham, well, I think there may be a misunderstanding of what exactly that means. Our officers, without the word respect, are held to a higher standard of Graham, because we don't follow Graham. Graham is something that we do follow, but we also hold our officers to the standard that the New Mexico Constitution talks about within the 10th Circuit, or that our 10th Circuit looks at when it looks at use of force, which is a higher standard than Graham. So we are a higher standard than Graham.
Wonderful, thank you, Commander Norris. I appreciate the clarification, just making sure that we understand that from a holistic perspective. All right, Mr. Reamer, let's go down to your recommendations that were accepted for, after the PPRB for 2-52.
Absolutely, sure. So overall, we submitted 17 recommendations during and before the PPRB process, or right after, and most were accepted by APD. I won't embarrass myself by confessing how many questions I asked during the special subcommittee and during PPRB. Honestly, I asked so many, I didn't keep a proper tally, and thinking back, it feels like I asked about every section of policy. While that's probably a slight over-exaggeration that I touched on every part or section of each of these policies, I do want to take this opportunity to thank APD, particularly Commander Norris and Ms. Roseborough from City Legal, for their great patience with me during this process and their ability to communicate with me. It's been it's truly admirable. So going down to the more notable recommendations, just to highlight some of these key ones, the first I want to bring up is the prone position and pressure release. So language was added requiring that officers position an individual on their side or sit them up once they are no longer actively resistant and it's safe to do so. The "and it's safe to do so" language was already present there, but during PPRB, we noticed during a discussion of the ECW post-use guidelines about how this language changing and incorporating this "no longer actively resistant" language. And thanks to the deputy director paying close focus to that, we were able to bring it back to a 252 recommendation when it came to the prone, face-down prone restraint, and include that language there as well. So this will make it consistent with the ECW post guidelines and the language in that section. It also reinforces the prohibitions against unreasonable and unnecessary prone restraint techniques. Moving on to the next big recommendation, or substantial one, was the warning prior to deadly force. This is a 252 recommendation as well. We recommended restoring the explicit statement that officers shall give a warning prior to using deadly force when feasible. Now, the SOP already has a general statement for officers to always pronounce force, or to announce force when feasible, whenever they use force, whether it's deadly or not. But we thought this language was important because of the severity of the deadly force context, and because it aligns with specific statutory language on the matter, specifically NMSA 30.2.6 in the subsection B in there, that is the statute for justifiable homicide by a police officer. The next big recommendation I want to touch on generally is that the medical attention language. So this is kind of a policy nerd point, but worth pointing out. There's a phrase that officers shall request medical attention if necessary after a use of force. This was expanded to request medical attention when an individual is injured or complains of injury. And it's a policy nerd point because if necessary doesn't incorporate a broad range of circumstances where things could be necessary, it's best to just state with specificity what calls for requesting medical attention, which is if an if an individual is injured or complains of injury. Next is we included in 253, we added or requested a definition for intermediate weapons.
Let me pause you real quick, Mr. Reamer. So did you just go into policy 2-53?
Yes.
Okay,
Sorry
I just
about
want to keep it to 2-52, just so then we can be clear and concise and just make
Yeah.
sure we're not going any further. Awesome. Board members, do we have any questions for CPOA or policy analyst Gabe?
However, I will say there are more recommendations that I will go on to talk about that still have to do with 252. The problem is that the definition section incorporates everything. It's not really possible for me to talk about the recommendations of 252 without talking about the recommendations of 253 because they affect what would come out in 252, if that makes sense.
Okay. Do we want to keep going just because it will affect 252 with those definitions and everything? Yeah. Okay. Sorry. So yeah, let's keep going because I think there are some questions that I'm going to have that will probably feed into that as well.
Right. So just continuing on with the recommendations that were submitted, this one about objectively reasonable force, and this is a definition. This was in line with the recommendations CPOA submitted concerning the necessary terminology within the APD use of force suite. The CPOA recommended including a definition for objectively reasonable and defining it as, in determining the necessity for force and the appropriate level of force, officers shall evaluate each situation in light of the known circumstances, including but not limited to the seriousness of the crime, the level of the threat or resistance presented by the subject, and the level of threat to community. This is based on the perspective of a reasonable officer on scene rather than with the 20/20 vision of hindsight. Now, I'll admit that most of this definition was actually lifted from the Las Cruces Police Department. I thought it was a really great definition that I found during my review of other use of force policies. I thought it was transferable to APD's policy as well because they don't just say reasonable force. I mean, that's often used throughout the SOPs, but they also use objectively reasonable as the core standard within 252. And this was in line with, included with recommendations that I'll touch on in a second when it comes to reintroducing when necessary terminology. But APD did partially accept this by actually defining objectively reasonable. Now, they used the definition they had prior for reasonable force, which is objectively reasonable force is based on the totality of circumstances known to the officer at the time of the use of force and weighs the actions of the officer against the right of the subject. In light of the circumstances surrounding the event, it must be judged from a perspective of a reasonable officer on scene rather than with a 20/20 vision of hindsight. So that was formerly the definition of reasonable force. They put objectively in front of it to account for that, which I think is good because that is one of the core standards within the permitted use of force. Now, moving on to the recommendations considering when necessary language for the specific policy or SOPs of 252.4b, 252.4c, and 257.1, which is this review of use of force instances, 257 and 8, we proposed keeping the language explicitly stating when necessary as a threshold for using force in APD's core principles. This was not accepted. However, APD did reintroduce necessary terminology within the core principle Sorry, I'll start this sentence over. APD did reintroduce necessary terminology within the core principle, minimum amount of force necessary, defined as the lowest level of force within the range of objective reasonableness that is relative to the degree of threat necessary to achieve a lawful objective. Honestly, I don't know how much the CPO had to do with this change, as it was not what we specifically recommended. So it may have been a decision APD would have made without my objections or recommendations, but either way, I believe this is a great definition and a great re-inclusion of the term necessary. And while I argued to use necessary in a different way, as an explicit threshold term instead of an analysis of the degree of force used, I wanted to use it as a when necessary rather than as a determination of the degree of its minimalness. The department provided a thorough explanation for removing it. While the department sent this explanation before reintroducing necessary terminology within the minimum amount of force phrasing, I believe the point they made still stands regarding why they did not want to re-include this when necessary terminology. And I'm happy to read what APD sent. I think it's well stated, and so if that's all right, I'll go ahead and do that. So the training and the review of an officer's use of force will not fundamentally change as a result of removing the term necessary from policy language. Now, it's been re-included, but not as a when necessary statement. Instead, the change refines and clarifies how force decisions are taught, applied, and evaluated by reinforcing a single, comprehensive analytical framework, objective reasonableness, and the minimal force under the totality of the circumstances. Excuse me for a sec. So, from a training perspective, instruction will continue to emphasize that officers may use force only when it is objectively reasonable and limited to the minimum amount of force required to achieve a lawful objective. The concept of necessity remains fully embedded within this analysis. Instructors will no longer need to explain necessary as a separate or standalone requirement, reducing the risk of inconsistent interpretation or artificial distinctions between overlapping concepts. Sidebar for me here, the key overlapping concept there is the one of in de-escalation, and particularly the officer's obligation to reduce the need to use force. Back to APD's statements. From a review and accountability standpoint, supervisors, force review boards, and investigators will continue to assess force incidents using the same substantive criteria. Reviews will focus on the totality of circumstances leading up to the force, the officer's decision-making process, whether de-escalation efforts were reasonable and feasible, and whether the level of force was used proportionate and minimal amount necessary to accomplish a lawful purpose. In practice, this means training and review will be more streamlined, more consistent, and more aligned with how force is evaluated in real-world administrative settings. Now, moving back to what I'm saying is that my reasoning for arguing for keeping necessary terminology in policy was that I didn't think the rationale by APD, although clear and well stated for its own reasons, accounted for how important that word necessary is. And my opinion was not based on political or ideological reasons, but what I think is most appropriate when officers should be permitted to use force. And I even agree that the language within the SOPs still inherently set a standard of necessity. I was concerned because necessary terminology is used by the Supreme Court of New Mexico in officer subject self-defense context, is used by our state statutes. In my opinion, or from my interpretation, they place a fairly explicit expectation on New Mexico law enforcement agencies to use that term. And I think this is why most, if you do a review of the policies of New Mexico law enforcement agencies, you will often find it. Also, from what I have seen, many experts in my field, advocacy groups, and professors at some what we would call foremost law schools strongly advocate for the use of this necessary terminology. I continue to argue for when necessary terminology be put back in policy, even after the word was reintroduced in the minimum force phrasing, because I believed that made the most sense from a policy perspective. But APD did not concur for the reasons that they already stated. So, and then I can go on to the recommendations that were not accepted, or do we have any questions about the ones that were or partially were?
No, I think there might be some questions here real quick. So let's just kind of, because I know there was a lot in this, so I just want to take an opportunity to ask if any board members have any questions so far from 2-52.
And I'm happy to clarify anything if I didn't make as much sense as I hope I did.
Idea? No. One thing I would ask if you could is to, another big change that I saw was the use of force classifications got changed.
Absolutely.
From level 1, 2, and 3, and now I believe, and I thank you very much for doing the work to identify those classifications in a more understandable and digestible format. So would you be able to outline what those new levels are?
I can certainly try. All right. So I agree that the most noticeable change in this policy suite is how the use of force is defined and classified. So in the currently published SOPs, it's a 3-tier system, including the lower tier that is not qualified as force, which is low-level control. So there's low-level control, and then level 1, level 2, level 3, increasing in severity all the way up. The revised system turns level 1, level 2, and level 3 into force classifications into 2, a binary use of force or serious use of force. However, the low-level control tactics, which still remains not a defined use of force, remains. To try to clear that up, I'll go through kind of just a summary of all of them. But what I will say is that the new tiering system itself is not dramatically different, as the 3-tier system is shifting into a similar 2-tier system. But what matters is how the definitions within those tiers have changed. And when I first saw it, the big thing that stood out to me, I was like, oh no, this is, as a person who produces reports with a lot of data, I thought, oh, this is going to be a real data headache, the changing of these definitions and the classifications. Although I think they're similar enough, that when it comes to comparing data from future, or when it comes to data and comparing future use of force data to past use of force data, I believe this should still be possible and valuable. The definitions within the use of force policies were subject to change anyway, and they did change over the years. So this was always something that the data analytics unit has to keep up with. And as someone who does it themselves, we're not just paid to make pretty graphs, we're paid to make sense of all this stuff. So I believe in the data analytics unit's ability to do that. While the numbers will change, I don't think it'll make it so that you can't make valuable comparisons to past instances. But moving on from that, and before I speak about the definition changes specifically, I should say that the CPOA believes the department's reasoning for the force classification injury definitions were well explained. APD's rationale is that the use of force review, particularly of low-level incidents, level 1 incidents, as we understand them now, was taking officers, especially supervisors who performed on-scene review, away from the field for hours at a time, sometimes up to 3 hours is what we heard. And when you consider that this was happening in cases where someone who had been arrested was not hurt at all, or is very mildly hurt, you picture a scraped knee, it is understandable when considering the department's resources and the need for officers and supervisors to be available in the field. So while some of these definitional changes are substantial, they are being made to improve the department overall and prioritize keeping officers and supervisors available to respond when and where they are needed most. So moving on to the actual definition changes, starting with low-level control tactics. So under the current policy as published, a low-level control tactic is defined as a technique not reasonably likely to cause pain or injury, and that does not produce a complaint of pain or injury. Under the revised policy, a low-level control tactic can now result in temporary pain or superficial wounds, including minor bleeding, scrapes, bruises, cuts, and abrasions, and will be classified as non-force, as it was before. Additionally, a show of force is no longer classified as a use of force under the revised definitions, although I believe this came as a special order prior to the changing those policies, and the commander made the board well aware of it at the time. Do we want to pause on low-level control, or should I move on to use of force?
Yeah, I want to pause on that for a second, because I have two things that I noticed. One, and this is, somebody's going to roll their eyes on this one, is one of the things too I noticed with low level is I didn't also see a show of force, and I could have just missed it, because I believe on the old policy, level 1 would have also include like the show of force, I believe. Now in the new policy, I didn't see a show of force being mentioned, and I know that's something that we would want to keep track of. And then even with the low level or superficial, how do we define that, right? If we're not medical professionals, how can we ensure, like, if someone bumped a head or had a bruise, that there's not worse injuries if we, if that is subjective? I know I'd put a lot in that one.
I mean, Commander Norris will probably answer this even better than I will, but I mean, show of force is still tracked. It's still a thing. It was not, the intention was for it not to be force, because it's not force. It is a show of force, and it is a separate category. When it comes to injury, my understanding in the conversations that we have is there will be a significant reliance on training as to how to define injuries. There is going to be, as I've heard from the department, essentially growing pains to figure out those dividing lines. But that is, my understanding is that a lot of that definition of what's serious, what's minor, what's superficial, all of those kinds of things will be in training heavily, with some modification as time goes on, if that's accurate.
Commander Norris, I know you knew I was going to ask about the show of force.
So Ms. McDermott was correct in that show of force we do not look at as low-level control or a use of force. However, that does not mean that it's not being tracked and it's not being evaluated. It's currently and will continue to be evaluated by supervisors. Every show of force will be evaluated by supervisors. An officer has to basically mark on their report that they did have a show of force, or they did have a low-level control tactic, or they did have a use of force. Those shows of force will be reviewed, every one of those, by the first-line supervisor. There are requirements within the policy on what an officer has to document with regard to a show of force, and actually kind of when they can show force, because you can still have a show of force that is not proportional to the level of threat. If it's not proportional to the level of threat, well, then we have a possible misconduct issue. Okay, so that is being addressed, it's being tracked. We track show of force to this day. When I present to you guys every month with the use of force report, show of force is on there, and those are still continued to be tracked. With regard to superficial wounds, bruises, cuts, scrapes, so that is going to be fleshed out in training. As Ms. McDermott said, and we completely expect it, myself, the executive staff, my division, there will be growing pains with regard to looking at those things and determining whether or not it was use of force based off of the injury. The important thing to understand is that if we have a complaint of injury, okay, a supervisor or an allegation of force, a supervisor is dispatched to that scene to do an on-scene investigation. Okay, there are certain steps that they have to follow within their on-scene investigation to make a classification as to whether or not it is low-level control or it is use of force, and it's a preponderance of evidence standard. So if we have medical show up and they say this guy absolutely needs to be transported, even though his, an injury is not visible, more than likely that is going to be a use of force, and we're going to get a call on that. And that's going to be hashed out in the training as well. It's when in doubt, you always call us, and we will always err on the side of caution with regard to that. We'll do a follow-up investigation, and we'll make the determination whether or not it's a low-level control tactic or a use of force. So we fully expect there to be, like I said, some growing pains, but that's the case with every new policy, every new kind of concept that we're trying to introduce, because we have been operating, for the past 10 years or so, 11 years under a specific way, which was a good way. However, it did produce a lot of unintended consequences for us. One of those unintended consequences was basically IFD was the de facto supervisor for the entire department. So was IAPS. That is not what we want. If you recall back to the settlement agreement, that was one of our biggest weaknesses, was strong first-line supervision. The only way that we can get supervisors to start supervising is to give them that responsibility and hold them accountable when they don't fulfill that responsibility.
Yeah, and I do see, and part of the policy is making sure, being more focused of like, hey, if you're not sure, get medical. Right. And I think that was one of the main things I wanted to see. The one thing, and I don't know why this is just the thing, is for the show of force, I know it's not necessarily listed in this policy because it's not a force, it's a show of force. Mm-hmm. Where in which policy would that be documented in? Because I know that's something we want to track. I just want to make sure we're aware.
I believe in 256.
Yes.
Okay.
Sorry to interrupt, but yeah, 256.4 B2, and I can read it to you. All department personnel who utilize a show of force while on or off duty, regardless of rank, shall check the show of force tab in the uniform incident report, complete a uniform incident report, and provide the following details in its narrative: the reason for the initial police presence, the lawful objective for detention and or seizure, a specific description of the facts that led to the show of force, including the behavior and any resistance from that individual, describe any warnings, verbal persuasion, or other de-escalation techniques used during the incident, and a description of each type of show of force used and the justification for each show of force. Also within 257, there's a field supervisor review of show of force responsibilities. That's 257.6A. So when there's a show of force, the supervisor shall ensure that the officer's narrative includes the elements detailed in accordance with SOP use of force reporting department personnel, and there's some additional language as well. So you're correct that 252 isn't specific to it, but 256 and 257 are.
Perfect. Yeah, and that's just one of those things that I knew got changed, and I want to make sure that we just have a paper or digital record or recording record of where this stuff goes. So, No, any other questions for, specifically around cases? All right, sorry, yeah. Now we can go back into, continue on, Mr. Reamer, with your deep dive into policy 2-52.
Sure, yeah. So actually, I think we're moving on to use of force. I flipped my page around, sorry. So very briefly, kind of, or summarized. So for use of force, the current definition, which I would say is the level 2 definition as we know it now, includes any force that causes injury, that could reasonably be expected to cause injury, or that results in a complaint of injury greater than temporary pain, regardless of whether the use of force was unintentional or unavoidable. The revised definition changes the injury and injury complaint standard to greater than superficial wounds, and removes the language regardless of whether the use of force was unintentional or unavoidable. So I'll pause there as well. Or I can move on to serious use of force. Moving on to that, so the current definition as published now includes force that results in or could reasonably result in serious physical injury, hospitalization, or death. The revised policy removes the phrase could reasonably result in, meaning, of course, that a serious use of force classification now requires that serious physical injury, hospitalization, or death actually occurred, rather than being a foreseeable possibility. Actually, that's quite a little bit of an overstatement, because there's also specific listed individual tactics that sometimes automatically designate as a serious use of force. But generally, that is the standard. Other notable changes to the use of force level that I think are worth noting, baton strikes are now outcome-based rather than count-based. The current policy triggers a serious use of force classification, or a level 3. At 4 or more strikes, the revision now requires those strikes actually cause serious injury. Accidental firearm discharges are explicitly excluded from critical firearm discharge definition. And empty hand techniques, specifically knees and elbows, are now explicitly listed as serious use of force if they cause serious injury. So that's for serious use of force.
Thank you, Mr. Reamer. One of the things that I did notice when we were talking about some of those was individual or intentionally targeting the head, neck, or throat, but it looked like they removed groin as well, and chest. And so I'm curious as to why they would remove, like, the chest I get for center, but like intentionally aiming for the groin on some of these things is part of the serious deadly. And I know Commander Norris, you're looking to come up, so if you have an answer for that, because I know that was, I saw that consistently throughout some of the stuff, was the removal of groin.
Right. There should, so if you look at, I believe, when you go into 254, if you look at those intermediate weapons that we're talking about, I believe it specifically states that you should not intentionally aim for, and it adds that groin in there. So I know that Mr. Reamer is not, are you on 254 yet, sir? I'm sorry.
No, I'm on
Were you still on 253?
We're on 252.
252,
Yes,
okay, I know that those intersect, and we were kind of oscillating between the two. So that is in 254 when it talks about those types of things.
So it's more just a kind of a cleanup, and then with some of the stuff.
Yes.
Awesome. Cool. And then one question I did have to, who's what? Oh, cool. Was around, I believe it was 252-A-3, which is pre-use of force, and then personnel shall announce themselves as police. But I believe there was when feasible, sworn personnel shall announce themselves as police, unless it is plainly obvious that they are a law enforcement officer by the virtue of their uniform or equipment or the circumstances of contact of the individual. Is that correct? So my one call out for that is I would want to say sworn personnel shall announce themselves as police and just kind of leave it very open, because one of the things that I think we saw in the last few years is swatting, right? Where, you know, there is a no-knock entry with the police into individuals' homes, not announcing themselves, and then can get into a discharge, right? Because it's, you know, should the officers announce themselves versus, you know, somebody's right, because I believe New Mexico is a castle doctrine state, so their homes, so an individual could have a right to defend themselves. And so if an officer comes in without announcing themselves at 1 o'clock in the morning, there might be a firefight if they did not announce themselves as police. And that's just, and I don't know if I'm even going down rabbit holes on that one. But that's just something that was big in the last couple of years, and I saw that and going, this could be an issue. So, Deputy Director McDermott or Commander Norris, if there's anything you would like to add or making sure I'm.
Well, if I could clarify, you're asking to have it more broadly added. You're saying the language, your recommendation or your discussion here is to add language just saying that officers should announce themselves. Is that
Yes.
what I'm understanding?
Right, because it says unless it's, visible, but, 1 o'clock in the morning and they're technically all in gear, yes, it's visible, but if somebody's 1 o'clock in the morning and you don't know what's going on, you're not, I would hope somebody would announce themselves as police, so, there's not a discharge, and then it's, from somebody thinking it's an intruder, because,
Sure.
Can
I respond to that, Ms. McDermott? I think that there may be a conflation between two different types of things here. The reason why we wrote it that way is we had officers that would contact individuals 12 o'clock in the afternoon, bright sunny day, in a big blue car, in a dark blue uniform with a silver badge. And they were not announcing themselves as police, and a misconduct investigation was being opened up on them for not announcing themselves as police when the dude showed up looking exactly like me. A logical person would probably go, hey, that's a police officer. Reason would lead one to believe that that's a police officer. Number one, we don't do no-knock warrants in New Mexico. The Albuquerque Police Department does not do no-knock warrants. Whenever we do search warrants, it is part of the protocol and it's part of the standard. And if you go to the search warrant policy, where we do have to announce our presence before every entry into any type of dwelling that we do. As far as any swatting type of issues or anything like that, the protocols for our SWAT team, number one, officers show up first. These individuals are well aware that officers are there because of their announcements. The SWAT team shows up, CNT shows up, we make contact with this person, we make everybody aware, to include the entire neighborhood, that there is a police situation going on, police are present, stay in your houses. This is unless it's a police emergency. So as far as adding it as an overall, every time you come in contact with somebody, you will announce yourself as a police officer, we felt was unreasonable, it's impractical. And it also led to a lot of issues with officers just communicating with people like a normal human being. They'd get out of their car, and this would be the script. I'm Officer so-and-so with the Albuquerque Police Department. You fight, flee, or run, force will be used against you. Hey, how you doing today? How is that a reasonable way to contact anybody? At all. So that's kind of a big reason why we took that out of there, because officers were getting letters of reprimand, progressive discipline, all the way up to days off for not announcing themselves as a police officer when they made contact with somebody that looks exact, and they were wearing exactly what I'm wearing. It's obvious that I'm a police officer. Not one of you here has ever questioned that I'm a police officer. That's a big reason why we did that.
Thank you, Commander
Sure.
Norris. Deputy Director McDermott?
I think that one of the things. That's all right, you can demo me, whatever.
I'm almost.
I think one of the things that maybe the board is referring to, but correct me if I'm wrong, Chair, is some of the use of force incidents that have been observed where you have undercover individuals who may have a vest or a cloth badge of some sort, but they're doing some sort of a taking someone into custody. They're coming out of unmarked vehicles. They're mostly undercover with some smaller marking. Maybe the back has it more prominent than the front, and trying to take somebody into custody. And I think those are the use of force incidents that we've seen that have resulted in some shootings, and that may be kind of the question, if you can kind of speak to that maybe.
Sure.
Yeah, and I do want to jump in here just to clarify myself, and thank you, Executive Director. Commander Norris, I agree. Like, I don't want every officer to come up to him if I'm just, going to socialize, just so, and introduce. Yeah, that's not feasible, not reasonable, and frankly, it'd be very robotic and not helpful. But I do think, to Executive Director McDermott's point, is there are times where I think that should be, even if they are dressed, and so I think there's some good judgment, and so that's where it's,
I think that's
Yeah.
where we put the term, unless it's plainly obvious. I am a plainly obvious police officer. Somebody jumping out in a raid vest with a rifle, it's not plainly obvious that that's a police officer. You can go buy those things anywhere. And a lot of our undercover, they're not really undercover if you're wearing a raid vest and you're jumping out on somebody. But when you are not in a full uniform like me, where it's plainly obvious that you're a police officer, I believe the vast majority of our shootings with, say, our investigative services unit, stuff like that, it's hands up police, hands up police. We do get there, well, I didn't know they were police because these other people wanted to shoot me anyway, because of the type of lifestyle that I live, right? So that's why we added that in there, plainly obvious that they are not law enforcement by virtue of their uniform and equipment. So when we talk about plainly obvious, that's what I was referring to earlier in terms of somebody showing up to a call who's dressed like me, as opposed to somebody with a beard, a baseball cap, and a raid vest. They have to announce their presence, and if they don't, then we look at that, it's got a sanction 6 on it, we look at that as a possible misconduct violation, and it's addressed accordingly.
yeah, I think it's always, whenever it's, the joys of policy is, you know, how much detail do you want to put in on some of this stuff too of, you know, plainly obvious, define plainly obvious, right? You know, a layperson test, right? There's all that stuff goes into it, but no, I think that helpful and clarifies. Vice Chair
Well, and I
Calderon?
think the policy does as well, right, by virtue of the uniform, equipment, or circumstances of the contact. So it answers all the if, ands, or buts that Commander Norris had mentioned, so I think it covers it sufficiently.
Agreed. Anything else, any other questions from board members? Any statements? Because I think we hashed through all of 252 pretty well. I did have one other thing here. Sorry, did you have anything?
No, I didn't.
Oh, okay. Was under 252-6-A-3, when requesting medical attention, when it is safe to do so, when an individual is injured or complains of injury, I did want to add, and without delay back in, because I think that would be, like, it's, to me, a nuanced thing of when it is safe to do so and without delay, right? So there is the sense of urgency, when is the scene is safe, when it is safe to do so, get the individual medical attention as swiftly as possible. Because I know it can say, well, you're going to do it anyways, but it's without delay, I think would be added back in, I think would be very helpful.
I take that to read more minor injuries.
I'm sorry?
I take that to read more minor injuries, like grazes and scrapes and things like that.
Okay.
I mean, that's my personal take on it. And further on, you have the serious uses of force that result in injury, severe injuries.
Well, I think the section that he's referring to, did you say it's 252-6?
252-6-A-3.
I mean, it's duty to provide medical attention and transportation following any reportable use of force. So either it's a use of any reportable use of force, whether or not it's serious use.
Okay.
You know, we even have that for low-level control. But yeah, it does not say without delay as of right now. So
Yeah, I can see both ways. I just wanted to call that one out just because the without delay just adds a little bit more urgency to it for that one individual thing. But I can't, go ahead.
I think it does, but as well under line 4, it's immediately request medical attention following any use of force, serious use of force, regardless of visible injury or complaint of injury, right? So at that point, I think it covers that aspect, tells you no matter what it is, to the point of Commander Norris, request medical, right? I think just reiterating to reiterate, right? Which yeah, it's not bad as well as this is policy.
Yeah.
And we're, it's long enough already.
What? No, not a lot.
So I think number 4 covers that.
Yeah, I know, providing medical attention is key, especially for individuals, so I just wanted to add that extra sense of urgency. But if we're all fine leaving it as is, then I'm okay with it. I just want to call it out.
Yeah, I'm okay leaving it just because it says, once the scene is secure, there's things that have to be done prior to ensure safety of everybody, to ensure that from there, at that point, medical aid is rendered, right? In a major incident as such, that's the priority, right? Is securing the scene, securing what you got to do, and then at that point, aid's given, right? Could there be a delay due to other factors? There very much is so, but the policy can't account for every single factor that's going to happen. I know, right?
I agree.
As much as we would love a policy to do that, that's just not the way it works, right? In reality. So I think it covers it enough myself.
Okay. So I think we should move on. I think we should vote on it first. So since you were the sub person that has done this, do you want to take lead on making the motion?
The motions for,
Accepting the CPOA's recommendations?
Executive Director McDermott?
Sorry.
So, yeah, just for a point of clarification, like, if you could be clear in your motion, like,
Yeah.
which, if you're accepting all of the things that have not been accepted, that had already been put forth, that you want us to essentially re-recommend, or if there are new things, or the item that the chair from the CPC brought forth, like, just make sure that in your motion, you let us know which things you're wanting us to incorporate in that recommendation from the board.
Thank you. Yeah, that was actually my next question. Is like, what part are we motioning on?
Yeah.
Because other than the CPC's recommendation, I think everything else is just conversation.
Okay.
And we haven't agreed on anything else. There's more clarification questions. There was no modifications that we wanted to put forth, to my understanding, right? Make sure I didn't miss anything in the past.
I had
52
no
minutes.
recommendations to bring forth to you guys specifically that I.
Right, and everything that's already been talked
Yeah.
about has already been either accepted by APD or the 2 that were either partially or declined are the ones there. So the only thing that we do have a recommendation for right now is CPC's
CPC?
portion, and that part we can vote for 2-52 to send forward for the CPOA to submit on our behalf. Understanding? Cool. Is that correct? I promise. Make sure
Yeah,
I'm-
again, like I
Okay.
say, if there's anything out of all the recommendations that have been made that you've gotten all the paperwork on, that the board feels strongly about, that they want us to submit as a recommendation again, with a formal response then from the department that, no, we're not, or maybe they'll
Yeah.
reconsider, whatever. So you just need to let us know clearly
Okay.
what it is that you're wanting us to do on the board's behalf when we do this recommendation. Because we'll fill it out for you, but we need to know exactly what you want us to submit.
Okay. So discussion within the board, I feel like there's no other recommendations other than the CPC's recommendation. The rest were just discussion points that we got clarified between CPOA Executive Director, with Gabe as well as Commander Norris, just clarifying our questions at the moment. Cool? So we'll make a motion for the CPC's recommendation to go forward, so we can get a formal input for that.
So
How do we feel?
I should unmute myself. I think, going back, looking at the core principle, 2-252-4-B is the recommendation is define what the higher standard is, in more of a detailed sense. I believe that was and there was some recommended language by, Mr. Jameson. So is that the recommendation, is to add a better definition of what the higher standard is that can be articulated in the policy?
Essentially, that's my understanding of it.
Yeah.
Well, if I may, I believe that, so you see 252 core principles, and there's the statement that the department already has in policy, 252 4B, and then the 1 is actual, I believe, and the person who put their recommendation forward could correct me, that's actual recommended language to include. And of course, APD, it could be changed by you guys in your own recommendation, or APD could alter it if they accept it partially. But I think that would be the recommendation you put forward, along with the attachment to, there's also a de-escalation part of it, inserting a reference to another SOP, to 252. So.
All right, thank you, Mr. Reamer. Mr. Jameson, I'm probably going to get in trouble for this. Do you want to come back up? Because I just want to make sure I'm understanding. I just want to make sure I'm understanding. So with the suggested, because I agree, right, is so you're wanting it to be like 252-4-B, and then there's the definition, and then it would be a subsection 1.
Correct.
Would be your definition.
Yes,
Okay.
because I believe it says, I don't have the language right in front of me this second, but it says one example of, then it goes into the language. I don't mean any of this to disparage the department at all, because I agree that things like respect for the community are certainly built into what they're trying to do here. But it always is nicer, if you're going to say, what's our core principle, to state it. And since the language that follows that really describes de-escalation as what they're trying to get done, that should be stated as the core principle.
Yep. Yeah, thank you, Mr. Jameson. Yeah, because I agree, right? Like, we need to better define the higher standard, right? And we are, to Commander Norris's point, is, part of the mission. There's a lot of the stuff, but I think the use of force and reiterating it again would be very helpful, right?
Dr. Jameson, I appreciate the things that you brought forth. I tend to believe that when you have a mission statement that is already in place and is at the core of the organization, as Commander Norris stated, I think it's very clear cut within from training to the overseeing of internal affairs and everything that goes along with it. I think it kind of addresses it personally. It's there. So I'm not sure any additional language
answer
needs.
that a little bit?
Sure.
In this kind of language, I think we have to think about what's the use of the language in the first place. A lot of the language that is in things like the use of force statement is setting standards with the question, was the officer somehow at fault? Okay? And that's what Graham v. Connor is really all about. But the other use of language you can put in something like use of force is, what are our goals here? And if our goal is to be respectful, to get other people to be respectful, because that tends to reduce violence, and also the violence of the officers, and to build de-escalation into how the department functions, that's more of a proactive goal and not really looking at, okay, my gosh, why didn't you call for more at this point and that point? And that's where I think we have difference. And that's why I put this forth this way. It's not, I think it's the difference between why we have these and what we really want to have happen.
Yeah.
Okay?
Thank you, Doctor. Board, with that, what do we think about the recommendation put forth by Dr. Jameson from CPC?
Chair, may I say something really quick?
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, so really, I just wanted to kind of bolster Mr. Jameson's point in some way. When it comes to 252-4B, there's not a discipline distinction for it, such that if, I agree totally with Commander Norris that the 1-1 and throughout APD's use of, or throughout APD's policies, all the hundreds of them, respect is always emphasized, but I understand how, 1-1 really is where the discipline distinctions, the sanctionable things come out of. But since 252-4B is just a kind of a guideline statement, right? It's not something to be enforceable. It actually does have room for a little bit more language, right?
That's kind of where I was thinking personally, is like there could be a room for a little bit more language, and then my brain, and this is over communication of the higher standard that APD will hold themselves to. I don't think is a bad thing for APD and the community to understand we are forcing ourselves to a higher standard and what that standard means. And I think that, especially now that the CASA is dismissed, I think the redundancy, I think, would be very helpful from a messaging perspective, and whether that's to the community, to the AP officers themselves, and then all department personnel, just having that message keep being repeated, I think would be beneficial and not necessarily annoying. Redundancy, kinda, but I think helpful to hit that home.
I think that key word is redundancy. And, you know, I mean, you can change a word here and there, but, you know, one of the things, just thinking about not only redundancy, but the way the messaging is coming across the community, I keep hearing a lot of cynicism from the community when I tell them, well, you know, these crime statistics that you often hear on the news aren't going along with the numbers that I'm hearing. And the cynics in them come out and seem to suggest that it's nothing more than an attempt to repair the image of Albuquerque as being a high crime area. So the changes, again, when it comes to the messaging, isn't coming across to the rank and file of our city. We've all done the ride-alongs, and we've all seen how officers react and how they treat the individuals that they are having to deal with at a certain given space and time. So that's a big concern for me is that we're doing all of this, yet it's not coming across. So, I mean, the verbiage can be whatever we decide. But again, the message has to come out loud and clear.
And with that, the recommendation, it's a recommendation nonetheless, right? So APD can either concur partially, or as well disagree with it and not use any of it either.
Right, yeah, this is just a recommendation. So, Member Weimark, is there anything you would like to add? Do you want to?
Yeah, I think we can push it forward for at least consideration for them to review and see how they can tailor it to fit for them. Of course, the recommendation, they can modify the language, change it if they want to, make it longer or shorter, however they see fit, based on the conversation that we had here. I mean, Commander Norris is here, so he knows exactly what's going on. So with that being said, I make a motion that we push forward this CPC recommendation for suggested change for SOP 2-52-4B, presented by Dr. Johnson. Johnson? Jameson. My apologies, sir. Yeah. He has a note.
Seconded.
So no, let me do it again.
and
I
I
messed
know.
up. Let me do it all over again. So I make a motion that we push forward the recommendation provided by Mr. Jameson for SP 2-52-4B. May I get a second?
Seconded.
Thank you, Chair. Ms. Barla, may I get a roll call vote, please?
Chair Bolianis,
Approved.
Member Budenaro,
Approved.
Vice Chair Calderon,
Approve.
Member Weimark.
Approved.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chairman. That motion passed unanimously.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Ms. Barla, real quick. So, Mr. Reamer, you okay with that? Does that give you guidance enough what to do with that?
Yes, so
Okay.
just put this forward for consideration. Provide, if you guys don't want to change the language at all, or just.
I can't think of anything.
I think it's written well enough. Commander Norris is here to kind of listen to kind of our side, so, he could go, whether they want to change the language or not, or kind of go, okay, I can kind of see it, whatever. That at least gives them some talking points on how to submit it, to just go, okay, from some wording or whatnot. So I think we're comfortable there from a wording perspective.
Can I say something?
Oh,
Sorry.
yes, Commander Norris.
I don't think it's just as easy as me going, yep, I'll go ahead and accept that. It's the department's policy. The chief of police ultimately has a say over it. From my understanding, there's a process that needs to go through for it to go through the chief of police to accept a recommendation from the CPOAB. We've accepted as IAD all the recommendations from, not all, but the recommendations from the CPOA. So I think that just so you guys are aware, I think there's a little bit more of a formal process to get that taken care of. It's It's more than just me going, yep, that's a great one, I'll add it in tomorrow. So I just want to
No,
make sure
I-
everybody's aware of that.
I appreciate the clarification,
Yeah.
because we know we know that you just can't rubber stamp it. We
Yeah.
get that, but it was more of if the chain for the policy had questions, they know you were here, so they could come and go, hey, what did they mean?
Right.
With this? Not that you will be the one to approve it. It's
Right.
more of if they have questions, they can come to you and
Sure.
you are part of the dialogue.
Yep,
so to
absolutely.
speak.
Yep.
So
Okay.
that's what it is, but I
Okay.
appreciate the
Just make sure we're on the same
clarification.
page.
Yes.
Yep.
Deputy
Just-
Director. Sorry, Executive Director, why do I do?
Just to clarify then, so the board's recommendation is this part for 252, unless you were going to make another motion, I don't know, but there's no other pieces of 252 that you're planning on moving forward, right? Okay.
That is correct.
And just to clarify for the process, so this will go through the same process that it always does. So when the board makes recommendations, we put it on what's a smart sheet, it's sent through the policy unit. The policy unit does send it to the policy owner typically. The policy owner then, either rejects, similar to what's already happened, but in this instance, we kind of did a just to make this smoother. So it'll go through that process. So I believe Commander Norris will be involved in that process. But as he said, yes, there's other layers to it. Ultimately, the chief decides to agree with these things or not. But it'll go through that same process is all I'm trying to say.
Thank you to Executive Director. I need a name tag, just like Executive Director right in front too. All right, so with that, let's move on. Oh, this is.
Actually, one final note on that recommendation, just so Dr. Jameson's aware, that one aspect that I will rewrite is the CSOP 255, just to be more consistent with the language the department uses. They say in accordance with SOP, so I'll slightly shift that language, but otherwise it'll be pushed forward as is. And then when it comes to we're only talking about 252, so got myself on.
Awesome. So let's move on to the next one, which is SOP 2-53. Mr. Reamer, do you want to give us a quick kind of overview of?
In fact, I believe I already have, because
Oh, you did, yes.
those definitions of the force classifications, those all came from 253, except for it's kind of impossible to talk about 252 without talking about 253. So I did it all together. So thanks for putting me up or allowing me to do that. Otherwise, this would have been quite challenging to to speak through, because it's really easiest to. I know when we make recommendations, we have to be specific, but this policy suite works as all together. It's hard to isolate them, especially 253 definitions, which, of course, are just the relevant definitions for each. For all the terms in the whole suite. So touched on everything, but nothing further unless you have any specific questions. I'm happy to talk about it.
Okay. And then just to ask out, is there anyone anyone who has any public comments for SOP 2-53? Okay. Board members, any questions? The one I did I did make a couple here, and someone's gonna roll their eyes at me here, is yeah, so where's the right one? Because I'm on page 2. Okay, so it is, I think under C, I didn't print off the whole thing, I don't know where I know, that's where sorry, my pages all got mucked up a little bit, so I'm not exactly sure yeah, it's the
So-
critical firearms.
Yeah, so SOP 2-53-3C is what we're looking at.
Yes, and so specifically around accidental discharges, one of the things I wanted to kind of add back in is identifying both an accidental and a negligent discharge, right? So, and I know that there is discussions on that, kind of largely, but I wanted to make sure, because negligent was in there, but I wanted to make accidental and or negligent discharge back into that part of the policy. And Mr. Reamer, I don't know if you've looked at that particular.
I feel like we had a conversation about this too, actually. Back at the policy and procedure.
Mhm.
Mm-hmm. Let me see.
You said and/or, don't they mean two different things?
Yes, but I can see individuals saying the same thing. Or meaning that, like, they are two different things, but they can sometimes be used interchangeably. And so that's where I could just be trying to do a little broader coverage. Or, we just call it an accidental discharge or a negligent discharge, right? And so I think that would be just something that we want to think about, just because, like,
I think it'll be accidental because negligent isn't determined until after the fact of an investigation.
so it's a legal context, not necessarily a.
Because negligence is not determined initially, it's accidental initially. Then based on facts and circumstances, it can be determined to be negligent. Sorry, add a whole little little turnover to your thought process.
No,
Because accidental is still in there,
Right.
and it's accidental discharges. But yeah, it's an accidental discharge. It's not negligent until someone determines it to be, whether it be official or non-official. But someone has to determine it's negligent. Because the likelihood of someone calling themselves out on a negligent discharge is not done until an investigation happens.
Yeah. I'm going to actually ask our counsel if there is, if that's, like, I can see that. I just want to, like, ask. Or city legal too, if, I know we have city legal here as well, between, like, accidental or then determined during the investigation to be negligent. I just want to make sure I'm getting my bases covered here.
Mr. Chairman, I actually think you have Venn diagrams here. As you could have a negligent discharge that's not accidental, and you could have an accidental discharge that's not negligent.
Right.
So I think they're two different terms.
Thank you. Yay, Lord.
I would not profess to be a scholar in this area, but I do agree that these are two different terms. And so beyond that, I don't know that we can say much more.
Yeah. Commander Norris, is there anything that you would like to specifically call out? I know this is semantics,
No, it's
but
right.
like,
Whether or not it's accidental or negligent, actually, Mr. Calderon was kind of along the right path.
Right.
It's going to be investigated as misconduct, and a determination is going to be made as to whether or not it was something that was, either it's a training issue or a misconduct issue. I have no. That's all I want to say. I don't have an opinion on it, on getting accidental or negligent, or if we want to put any other word in there as a third version of it. I have no opinion on it.
And I think being an internal policy as well, we know it's to be investigated no matter what. And at that point, they determine what the facts are, right? And so they come out to the outcome, right? This isn't for general public either. This isn't for a layman's person to be judged upon, right? That's state law for that, or city.
okay.
It's not a hill I'm willing to die on.
I mean, if that's the case, right, like, I could see the argument, not that I'm saying we should do it, but I can see the argument that when in doubt, it should be negligent first and then proved accidental, or, I mean, like, or is it just always an AD? Again, this is just my own.
If it's already being investigated as misconduct, the determination is made there, so I'd have to agree with Vice Chair. Anything that is an accident or negligent, that's going to be determined with the investigation.
Yeah, if it's automatically going to get investigated,
Yeah.
not that big of a deal. I just was curious. Remember?
Well, I think negligent carries more weight and more, potentially more of a penalty. Accidental is, well, accidental. Negligent is is somewhat close to deliberate.
Right, so, I mean, we're now going down rabbit holes of accidental versus negligent, right? Like, if you accidentally violated one of the 4 rules of firearm safety, then it would be negligent because you knowingly, like, you know those rules. Again, not necessarily trying to make anything out of it bigger than what it is. I just am curious if we want to even go down that rabbit hole.
I don't.
Okay. Then I will
Sorry.
stop that one. All right, thank you, Vice Chair.
I can see where you're going with it, but no, I
yeah.
still don't. I don't think it's, I don't think it's beneficial.
Okay.
And granted, I don't have a lot of these questions because mine were done during
Yeah.
our subcommittee part
Yeah,
process.
you got to it
so,
before me,
yeah.
before get to
So this is
argue
your show.
these back and forth.
This
Oh,
is-
thank you. Because, I need more time talking about nuanced things.
We can play off it.
I'm just looking at my notes here. I don't think I had any other ones for 2-53. Nope, I don't. Board members, any other questions for 2-53? CPOA or policy analyst?
Nope, nothing
Any
further.
other questions? Okay. So with that, I don't think we're actually making any recommendations, so we can move on to the next policy. And that would be SOP 2-54. And, nope, that's 2-55. So.
I don't have anything specific for this policy. I'm happy to answer any questions, but no high-level overview. It is a specific policy as it is, so.
Do you want to open it up for any public comment for specifically around 2-54? Nope. Okay. Board members, any questions or anything that you want to call out? So I'm going to be a pain, and Executive Director McDermott's going to kick me in the shins later, it's fine, is under the policy, I know there's going to be more, but I think specifically this one too, I would really want to add necessary back in. So 254-2, this policy is for the intermediate weapon usage systems only when reasonable and minimal, and I want to add this policy is for the department to use intermediate weapon systems only when necessary, reasonable, and minimal in order to gain compliance with lawful objectives, or some variation of those 3. I know this has been back and forth
Yeah, Mr. Reamer,
more than once.
do you want to give your back brief on
Yeah.
the necessary conversation we had? Do
Oh,
you remember it?
Sure, yeah, no, I believe I sort of already touched on it, but I actually kind of agree with the chair in this regard. This could be changed to match the language that you find in the core principles right now, which is the minimum amount of force necessary. But they may correct me when it comes to 254 and it's the usage of certain tools. Maybe that's not as much of the necessary is in the consideration. But I understand where that recommendation is coming forward just as a policy consistency point. But I'm happy to expand and to explain further on after this about the necessary terminology if you want to talk about that more. But I agree with the chair's point on just the matter of policy consistency here.
Yeah, I think it's consistency, and it's, again, like, I know there's a bigger argument, like, going back and forth. So I didn't want to spend that much time with it, but I at least want to specifically call that out and try to add necessary back in there, right? Because I think, too, like,
As much as I hate to agree with you, I agree with you. Yeah.
yeah. Yeah, that's 3. Member Weinberg, any? You do think necessary belongs? Yeah. Executive Director McDermott, is there anything the CPOA wants to add, or anything that they would want to add to this conversation around?
I mean, no, you've heard from, we've analyzed this a lot. I mean, basically APD's argument, again, I don't want to speak for APD, they can say, but, as a separate concept, they've said that that's difficult. I would agree more that it is incorporated in it. It doesn't, in my mind, doesn't hurt to say it. But I can appreciate the argument that they're stating, but if the board feels that it's worthy of incorporating that statement back into this, well, I don't think it was in this, but incorporating this for the matching, we can put that forth, and then APD will respond as a response that this is why we can't. That's the requirement of this whole process, is formal recommendations either get accepted, partially accepted, or non-concurred with, and then if they're non-concurred with in particular, that you get a specific explanation for that. So if that's what the board thinks that is worthy of adding back in, we'll put that through as a recommendation, and then the APD will either consider and add it, or they will agree, or, modify it, or they will say why they're not.
Thank you, Executive Director. Commander Norris, is there anything that you or another APD representative wants to add to this discussion topic? I don't want to exclude you guys from it, so.
No, I appreciate it. No, I think, yeah, it speaks to the consistency of it. We have no issues with it mirroring what the core principles say.
So, do we want to make this recommendation on this, or do we want to do it all at once? Be very specific? Cool. No, you.
I make a motion that we push forward the recommendation to add necessary
Back into this policy.
back into the section 2-54-2 under policy. Can I get a second?
Seconded.
Thank you, Chair. Ms. Butler, make a roll call vote, please.
Wait, excuse me, I'm
Yes.
sorry. Just for a point of clarification, where do you want to add it? Like, does it matter to you, or?
Yes,
I
guess,
wanna
sorry,
make sure it's- yeah.
to echo on that point, like, so are we, is it necessary as a standalone concept there, or is it the attachment to the minimal? So basically, if we were to rewrite this, it would say, to be consistent with the current core principles, only when objectively reasonable, or is with core principle would say, and then, and only the minimum amount of force necessary under, or to gain compliance with lawful objectives. That would make it be the most consistent, I believe.
Yeah, I would say it needs to align with the core principles, where they have necessary, right? So I would say since Vice Chair Calderon didn't make the motion, then I would say the motion on the table is that we add the definition of necessary back into the policy to ensure that this section 2-54-2 aligns with the core principles stated before. Does that help clarify, or it makes it even more confounded?
Just a modification. You're basically asking that the word be added in, and you want the definition to match the core principle definition that already exists,
Correct.
as Mr. Reamer read.
Yep.
That's
Correct.
what you're asking for. Okay. So just make the motion of that.
So I make a motion. Mic's not even on. My mic's on now. Okay. I make a motion for 2-54-2 policy that we add necessary back so it matches the core principle definition that you just described. Make it a second.
Seconded.
Thank you, Chair. Ms. Bertha, can I get a roll call vote now?
Chair Bouillon,
Approved.
Member Budenara,
Approved.
Vice Chair Calderon,
Approved.
Member Weimark.
Approved.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chairman and Mr. Chairman. That motion passed.
Thank you, Ms. Brilla, because that was a very tough motion to make for some reason.
Thank you, Executive Director.
Let's go to the notes here. So I did have a question on 254-5-A-1-A. So that was the capsaicin spray or OC spray usage guidelines. Sworn personnel shall, and then A is use OC spray when reasonable and minimal in order to gain control of an active resistant individual. And then it was removed or to protect sworn personnel and or others from a threat. My question is, why was or to protect sworn personnel or others from threat removed?
Again, I won't speak, I mean, I'll let Commander
Not a
speak,
question I
but-
asked.
Yeah, I do, sorry. Commander.
Because threat is part of active resistance. A threat, an imminent threat, is part of active resistance. So we just kind of condensed it to make it just a little bit more direct statement.
Okay. Yeah. Sorry, my brains were working there for a second. Well, so, question, right? So, and this is just hypothetical, just trying to process what you just said, is if an individual that you just walk up to, right, they're not necessarily detained yet or in the process of being arrested and they charge at you, and you can use OC spray, wouldn't that be a threat, not necessarily actively resistant? Does that like,
Somebody's charging at an officer feels that they have to defend himself, by definition, that would probably be assault on a police officer, which would be some sort of active, if they're detained or if they are assaulting an officer, that is a threat, that is a form of
right?
active resistance in a way. I mean, they were resisting your presence actively by charging at you, wanting to fight you.
I see the logic there. I guess it's still just my brain is having to do some different connections as to like active resistant individual versus a threat. That's the only nuance, and I don't know if that makes sense. And so board members, help me if you guys understand it. Great. My brain is
For the OC portion, it makes sense.
Yes. I agree.
to leave
For
it just,
this section, it makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah. If it was a different thing or different tool being used, it'd be a different story. Or for OC, it makes sense.
for only active resisting, not putting the word threat back in.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Because the likelihood of to go down the rabbit hole you're going down, I'm not using OC spray for a significant threat.
Yeah. No, that's fair.
That's the least of things I'm using.
That is true. Yeah, if somebody's charging at me, I'm not necessarily going to pull out an OC spray.
Depending on the situation, right?
Right.
But actively resistant individual,
Yeah.
typically someone that's on the ground or something like that, right? Or closer than other things.
Okay.
So for this section, I think it makes sense.
CPOA, is there anything that you guys would like to add? I just want to make sure you guys are in the conversation.
I mean, the only thing I would say is, throughout this whole policy suite, the whole objectively reasonable in terms of you have to have a reason, right? So restating the protect sworn personnel or threat, all of that's already part of this whole conversation. So the active resistance and passive is kind of where APD is dividing to help the officers understand the difference between when you can use force, period, like just for any of these things. So I don't know that it necessarily needs to restate that you're protecting somebody from a threat, because that's kind of why you're using any force for any of these things. It's one of those examples of why you would do it. So I get it, unless I'm misstating that.
No, I think, and in the definition of active resistance in 253, one of the subsections is poses an imminent threat.
Okay. I was just one that got my noodle there for a second. Cool. All right, I think those were all my questions for 254. Excuse me. Any board members, any other questions? All right, since we didn't necessarily make a recommendation for anything, we don't have to vote. We did the one, but the other one that we didn't. So let's move on to 255. Mr. Reamer, is there?
I would only mention that this is policy changed only very minimally. I think there was, there was almost no changes to this policy, so.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes,
We did
Ms.
have a
Perla.
public comment.
Yes,
Mr.
I was going to get to that
Okay,
next. But
just want
yes.
to make sure.
I just wanted to see if policy analyst Gabe had any questions. So with that, let's move on to public comments specifically around 2-55.
I think Mr. Jamison did depart because
Yes.
his more important one was already resolved,
Yes.
but I'll bring the board's attention to his other recommendation for 255 was in the related SOPs, he had recommended to add 2-52 use of force general as the list, as part of the list, similar to 253 use of force definitions is already there. So that was my understanding, his recommendation. I don't think he felt the need to say that, so.
Yeah, I actually was going to address that myself, because I know it was up here, and I actually saw that and went, yep, okay. So, board members, does that make sense? Is under this, right now, there's only 2 related policies, so we wanted to add 252, 2 related policies.
Makes sense.
Member Buenar? Commander Norris, is anything you'd like to add?
No issues with that.
All right, so then I make a motion that on policy 2-55-A related SOPs, we add policy SOP 2-52, use of force general, to the definition section. May I get a second?
Second.
Thank you, Member Weimark. Ms. Barilla, can I get a roll call vote, please?
Chair Bolianitz,
Approved.
Member Budenaro,
Approved.
Vice Chair Calderon,
Approved.
Member Weimark.
Approved.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. That motion passed unanimously.
Thank you, Ms. Barilla. Yeah, I think that was the only change. Board members, is there anything that you would like to add? Anything else you guys saw in 255? No. Executive Director McDermott, is there anything specific, anything the CPOA would like to add for policy 255?
Just one thing, Chair. I mean, if we're adding 252 up in the related SOP, we should also add 254 that talks about the use of intermediate weapons. You should also be considering de-escalation when you're using intermediate weapons like ECW or any other things. So I would just say if we are adding that in the related SOP, we should also throw in 2-54.
Yeah, I don't see why not. I mean, I also think all these policies should be somewhat related to each other globally. So, I mean, maybe is that the motion that we just say, hey, all these use of force policies should be related to each other, right? Because they're all interdependent.
Well, I would say that the later ones, not so much. Those are all about investigation and reporting and things like that. So I wouldn't say all, of the use of force suite. I think, the CPC member mentioned the 252, as Deputy Director Abbasi mentioned 254. Those are, again, more specifically to the actions which de-escalation speaks to. The other things would not directly relate to de-escalation, the investigation of, and that's a different thing, and the reporting of, in my mind, anyway.
I will add the note that just a matter of convenience, it's good to have these policies referenced up there because they provide a hyperlink within Power DMS.
Right, yeah.
Which, just for people, it's easier to then, while these policies, anyone with any little understanding of the APD policy will know that 252 through 257 is the use of force policy suite. They probably know that these policies are all somewhat related to each other. But if you want to make it easier to all read and to connect with each other, you can just
breadcrumb
reference
hyperlinks.
them.
Yeah, for sure.
So.
Commander Norris, is there anything you would like to add about adding 254 to the related policy?
No, nothing at all.
Board members, do we think that's a good addition to make to the definitions as well? All right, then I make a motion that for SOP 2-55, subsection A, we should add the related SOP 2-54 as well to the related SOPs. May I get a second?
I would second that.
Thank you, Member Budenaro. Ms. Barilla, can I get a roll call vote, please?
Chair Bolianitz,
Approved.
Member Budenaro,
Approved.
Vice Chair Calderon,
Approved.
Member Weimark.
Approved.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, that motion passed unanimously.
Thank you, Ms. Barilla.
You're welcome.
With that, I think we covered 2-55 pretty extensively, so let's move on to SOP 2-56. Mr. Reamer, do you want us to give us a rundown here?
I can. I will say that this is particularly hard to summarize because while doing so, all you can really do is exclude some of the language that APD includes about its requirements. So to get a real good understanding of 256 and 257, I think the policies kind of stand alone because they're so detailed and thorough about the requirements that go into these. But I could walk through the what's shifted from the policy before. So when it comes to the reporting of an unreported use of force, it's the same as before, except for now there's additional policy language talking about PMU audits, so from the metrics unit, prepares an inspection of findings report for potential uses of force and provides it to the division head commander within 2 business days. The division head notifies IFD of the use of force or serious use of force. IFD would review those PMU findings, classify the force, and generate force entry in the IA database within 24 hours if anything is discovered. And then the investigation procedure. So IFD will investigate unreported uses of force or serious uses of force, including on-scene procedures, if attainable post-incident. So they will examine for injuries, preserve evidence, they'll canvass for witnesses, and they will initiate an IRR, as they always do, for all policy violations, including a failure to report that use of force.
Are there any public comments for 256?
No.
Okay. Board members, do you have any questions about 256? CPOA, is there anything we would like to add to 2-56?
I think the only thing that was contemplated within the agency is that Commander Norris has explained, because there's going to be some growing pains and things like that, they have a threshold of how a percentage of audits that they're going to do, which I think is 30%, if I recall him saying correctly. So I don't know if it's wise to at least put some minimum amount in the policy or not. That would be just something we talked about, that there should be at least a minimum threshold of percentage, so it would be articulated, at least there's that. Now I know it's going to shift and they can always correct it via special order, but that was just a conversation that we had within the agency, is that there be some minimum threshold that was listed in this process that's outlined here.
Can you define the minimum process? Like, sorry, my brain is broken. So when you're saying the minimum process, I'm just hoping for a little more clarification.
Well, again, as far as, and I'll let Commander Norris speak to it, but I know there was 30% was what was talked about, but will it be eventually 5%? Will it be 50%? I mean, that's the issue.
Oh, okay.
So actually to be more specific, it's actually going to be 30% from each area command, each division. So not just 30% from the whole department, because you're not getting an accurate account really, right? I mean, we have the Southeast Area Command. You hear me up here every month telling you how at Southeast Area Command we have probably the highest levels of force, or at least the highest volumes of force. So that, logically probably correlates to probably the highest level of low-level control. So we're taking 30% from each area command in basically each division. That's to include the tactical division, our investigative divisions, not just field officers, right? Because they're not the only ones who have contact with the public. Right now, we're starting at 30% because we are working out a process and how those low-level controls are going to be reviewed. We actually just had a meeting today with the low-level control team about taking samples of low-level controls. We have to change up kind of the forms that we do those things on, what we need to cover, make sure it aligns with the policy, and seeing how much time it's going to take to do an adequate, comprehensive low-level control audit or review, and taking those man hours relative to kind of the manpower that we have and making sure that that's manageable for our team, because the last thing that we want to do is revert back to 3-4 years ago where we have a backlog, where we had a backlog of use of force. We don't want a backlog of anything. So right now we chose, it sounded like kind of not really an arbitrary number. We kind of worked it out where 30% seemed manageable. We understand it's going to kind of go up and down throughout the months just because that's the way things start. But what we would like to do is just start off with that 30% and then see, okay, can we handle more? Or do we need less because we're starting to have a backlog? Because we have due dates on those low-level control audits. We don't, those things aren't investigated into perpetuity. There needs to be some sort of management control, which is right now stands at 14 days for those low-level controls. So what we want to do is see how that process works out first and then put a hard number minimum in the policy, probably through a special order. But once we can see that that's sustainable and that's something that we can continue to go with or even increase the number, that's where we want to go ahead and put a minimum of.
I muted myself, luckily for you guys. No, that makes sense from a number perspective. I just want to make sure we got that clarification. So, Executive Director McDermott?
No, I mean, that makes sense, and I think as the board has mentioned many times, and I'm sure it will be incorporated in the use of force reports that the board will get in some capacity or another, it's something that the board can kind of monitor, and then if there seems to be an issue that APD, for whatever reason, I doubt, but if they weren't seeing and addressing it, the board can always recommend to address it. So I think it's just one of those things at this point with that explanation that the board can monitor and, you know, decide with collaboration if there's some change that should need to happen.
Thank you, Executive Director. Board members, any questions? I did have one, of course. So for 256-4-A-3, and it was specifically around a supervisor ordered or is involved in serious use of force, or a victim of an individual's action, but there was some verbiage being a witness or not, historically versus current. So I just was curious as to if, the way I read it, is if a supervisor was witness to the use of force, not involved in, but was a witness or a victim, they could do the report, or is that?
Well, they don't do a report, they do the on-scene investigation.
Okay.
We do the report if it's a use of force, IFT does.
Okay, sorry, the
So-
on-scene investigation.
Right, before, if they were a witness, they had to separate themselves, call for another supervisor, once the supervisor got free from anywhere in the city, and then have that supervisor possibly leave their area command, come do this investigation. We have it to where if a supervisor witnesses a use of force, they can do the on-scene investigation and classify it, and then make sure that it gets to IFD. If it's a use of force, he or she sends it to IFD. If it's a serious use of force, then we actually respond on scene. Okay, so if they witness it, they can do the on scene. So one thing that's important to realize is when we review our uses of force, when we do our use of force investigations, we're also reviewing the on scene. So we're making sure that what the officer witnessed is, and his on scene investigation, that there's corroboration there, and that the sergeant is doing everything that he or she needs to do to make sure that there was an adequate on scene investigation.
Okay, yeah, I think that was going to be the number one concern that I had, and you addressed it, is want to make sure that there's no untoward on-scene investigation details. If a supervisor witnessed it and they wanted to cover up or manipulate, I just want to make sure there was none of that, or if there was a way to catch to ensure that that was the facts are being caught. And so if a supervisor did do something untoward, we identify it and can track it down. So you covered my one concern for that. So that's where I just wanted to, because I could see, I'm like, oh, this could be kind of sketchy if so. But no, if that's how we do the investigations, I'm comfortable with that. So Executive Director McDermott, is there anything the CPOA would like to add? Board members? That is all I had for that. Cool. All right, thank you, Commander Norris. Let's move on to SOP 2-57. Mr. Reamer, is there anything that you would like to add specifically to this particular one?
No, sir. Thank you.
Are there any public comments for SOP 2-57?
There are none, Chairman.
Board members, is there anything that you guys saw on SOP 2-57 you guys want to address or have questions on? I did actually have one, and this is more of, so for 2-57, B dash, oh, sorry, 2-57-5-C, where in the current language says, when there is a serious use of force, the responding supervisor shall. Originally, it said when there was a use of force or an allegation of a use of force. And so do we want to add an allegation terminology back in? Commander Norris?
If you go down later in the policy, it talks about if there's an allegation of force that a supervisor is to respond. See if I can find it for you. And if that isn't 257, it would be covered in 256. Yeah, here we go. So if you go down to 257.5, supervisors shall respond to scenes for allegations of force and/or allegations of injury to determine if the allegations are caused by sworn personnel and/or to properly classify the force as a use of force or a serious use of force. That's going to be 255A. I'm sorry, 257.5A.
257.5A. Yeah, there's so many different. Oh man, I'm sure it's in there, and I'm sure I'm missing it, and that's fine because I'm. Okay. So as long as there's that, I just want to make sure that was touched on. Okay. Okay, cool. I just want to make sure that, because I saw that removed out from larger, so I wanted to address it. So, no, that's all the questions that I had specifically for 257. Let me just check my notes here. Cool, awesome. Any other questions? We're not making any policy recommendations for 257, so that is, yeah. CPOA, Executive Director McDermott, or Deputy Director Bossy, is there anything that you guys would like to add around 257?
Just sort of a minor clarification, in that same section that the commander was just speaking about, supervisors shall respond to the scene. If we just want to correct or make sure we understand that it could be the supervisor already at the scene, right?
That's correct, ma'am.
Okay. So I don't know if it's necessary to tweak that a little bit, saying respond or already there or something of that nature, or if it's clear enough about respond to the scene.
Mm-hmm.
But, so.
Unless there is an on-scene supervisor.
Yeah, I mean, you could just add, unless there's an on-scene supervisor not involved or something like that. It might get cumbersome that way, but if it doesn't affect anything too much with APD in terms of respond is clear enough, that's fine, but just to be clear that, you know, a non-scene supervisor could actually do
Could
it,
actually
so.
be there, yeah. So, Vice Chair Calderon, are you reading it and making sure?
I think it's okay the way it is. And the reason why I say that is because the responding supervisor, whether they're there already or responding, depending on what it is, they responded to that call, right?
Mhm.
Logically speaking, but that's how I think.
Yeah, I mean, I think we can leave it as is, and if there's issues, we can
Yeah.
add it later.
We can request.
Yeah, we can request it later. What do you guys, Member Weimark, Member Gunnar, what do you guys think? Yeah, okay. So I think we'll leave it for now, so.
Of course, keep us appraised if anything comes across
Agreed.
your eyes. Yeah.
Okay. So with that, I think that is all of the policies for the use of force suite, 250, SOP 2-52 to 2-57. One question I did have for you, Commander Norris, and you're going to kick me in the shins for this, I swear, is this is the first use of force that policy suite we're reviewing since we have had the CASA been dismissed.
Yes.
I know that there is fears in the community and just in general that this might be a slippery slope to getting back under the DOJ and the work that we were doing with the DOJ. And so I just wanted to get your opinion of, you know, are you comfortable if the DOJ was here doing this review, if these would pass, make sure that they are up to those high standards that the DOJ set forth. So I know I'm putting you on the spot. I know that's a loaded question.
Yep.
I know you also are you did a lot of work with it, so I just want to make sure
Yeah.
you're comfortable.
Yeah, I will tell you this. I can't speak for what the DOJ would or would not approve of. and I'm not going to. What I can tell you this is that if you look at other policies around the country with major metropolitan police departments, this is still one of the most restrictive policies in the country. There are things in this policy that other policies that larger cities do not have that we have, things that we require of our officers that other large police departments don't have. So I will say that without speaking for the DOJ, I'll say that it's still one of the more restrictive use of force policies in the country with regard to a city our size, a department our size, with the issues that we face relative to crime, relative to mental health, relative to substance abuse, and the amount of contacts that we have on a monthly basis relative to the uses of force that we have.
Board members, any questions? Nope. Member Weimer, any questions?
No.
Awesome. Thank you, Commander Norris. I know, I just wanted to ask that pointed question.
No
problem. So with that, we can move on to the next order of business, which is adjournment. With that, I make a motion to adjourn our next, I was getting to that. Our next regularly scheduled board meeting will be Thursday, March 12th, here in the Griegos Conference Room. That's our normal one, but because this was the special session. So let's reiterate the motion to adjourn. May I get a second?
I second that.
Thank you, Member Budinaro. Ms. Barilla, can I get a roll call vote, please?
Chair Bolianet,
Approved.
Vice Chair Calderon,
Approved.
Member Weimer,
Approved.
Member Budinaro.
Approved.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. That motion passed unanimously.
Thank you, Ms. Barilla. And thank you guys for attending tonight, and you all have a great rest of your evening.